When I first learned about this, the first way I think about it was a little bit of a panic
Mhm.
because the enforcement is very, very scary. They have a whole list of ways that they say they can go after you, including jail time and fines, daily fines for being out of compliance.
Hello, hello. Welcome to today's session of Selling the Couch. I hope you're doing well, having an incredible day. So, today's podcast is actually something that you should absolutely listen to if you are a therapist in private practice based here in the US. We are talking about the Corporate Transparency Act, what therapists need to know. This is a brand new act, and it's required that you are in compliance by the end of 2024. The process, it sounds very scary, but the essential point of the Corporate Transparency Act is to reduce the amount of money laundering and all of these things that are happening when folks are creating shell companies and stuff like that. So, especially if you have an LLC or an S-corp, please take a moment to listen to this session. So I am joined by Dan Mayer and David Yud. David is a licensed psychologist. Dan Mayer is an attorney. Again, this session is just for informational purposes only. Definitely consult with your attorney and or accountant as you navigate this. But we're talking about this Corporate Transparency Act. In simple language, what is it? What are the requirements of the Corporate Transparency Act when it comes to being a therapist? And then also, what does the filing process look like for therapists, both solo practitioners and group practitioners? So, if you're a group practitioner, for example, does every one of the therapists that are working under you, do they also need to file this? Questions like that. And then we get into some things like what are the implications of not complying with this act, as well as even the constitutionality of this act. It's there's a whole bunch of articles online with regard to this, and so I think you're going to find this session incredibly helpful. And so we'll just jump in. Here's my conversation with Dr. David Yud and Dan Mayer. Hey, Dave. Hey, Dan. Welcome both to Selling the Couch.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Melvin. Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you. This has actually been a while since we've done a three-person one, so this is either going to be epic or it's going to be an epic failure, but we'll see. We'll roll with this. Uh,
Or with
and
high hopes.
high hopes, right? Low barometer, whatever it is.
But
Yeah.
it's going to be a spectacular thing to happen. So it's fine, okay? But we're shooting for the high bar. We're good.
Yes, absolutely. When you guys reached out over the summer, I mean, Dan, you and I have known each other 5+ years.
Oh
Dave,
yeah,
we're just
been that
getting to
long?
know.
Wow.
Yeah, I know it's crazy. And you've worked with a lot of therapists. I mean, that's primarily your practice and working with, you're an attorney by profession. You work primarily with therapists, navigate the legal stuff that they have to figure out. You're also a valuable resource for us in our online course mastermind as therapists think about courses and how to legally and ethically do that. Dave, I know you guys have been doing a lot of cool stuff together, including a podcast. And I'm excited for you to be here because so you're a psychologist in private practice, so you're navigating this, and I think to get that perspective, I think will be really interesting. We're talking about the Corporate Transparency Act, what therapists need to know, Dan, in super simple language, because like legal stuff scares the heck out of me sometimes. What is the Corporate Transparency Act?
Okay, so a couple things to know. Okay, first off, the Corporate Transparency Act is actually the sub-act of another act. It's a sub-act of another act, right? So, believe it or not, in bureaucracy of government, the Corporate Transparency Act is actually part of the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which is then itself part of the National Defense Authorization Act, I think, for 2021. But the
May I just interrupt Dan and say he
yeah,
asked for super simple language. You're
right.
doing
No, I
great.
know.
You're doing great so far.
I just want people to know, like, this is where it's coming from, right?
Mm,
But it went into effect as of this year, okay? And so what it basically means is it requires certain business entities, what they title as a reporting company, to file something with the federal government, confirming that you are who you are and that you do own or have some sort of interest in this reporting company. It is reported to and you file with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, in the long words FinCEN, as we call it, and that's through the Department of the Treasury, or the federal government. Right? Just a quick kind of analysis of what that means and why this is now being asked of people and therapists. Essentially, the goal was to combat money laundering, okay? Financial crimes, money laundering, terrorism, things like that. And so what they were finding was that bad guys were using shell companies to do this, and they didn't have a good way of tracking it. So they decided that through this law, they could have those who do qualify to have to file some information, which is then put into their database. Okay. One other point I want to add to people, because I've actually gotten this question, is okay, well, what does the federal government do with this information once we file it? It does sit in a database that can be used by FinCEN. And they also are authorized to disclose it, and I have a list here, so I'm just going to read it rather than just have it set from memory, to U.S. federal law enforcement agencies, with court approval, to other agencies, to non-U.S. Enforcement agencies like judges, prosecutors, and then with the consent of a company, their practice, to their financial institution or the regulatory governed financial institution. So that's just a little bit of kind of the icing on the cake here of what we're talking about.
So the way that I understood it, it basically is a way for the federal government to verify that if you have like a LLC or an S-corp or whatever is set up in the US, that it's doing what it's supposed to. It's not doing something illegal.
And foreign. So it's anybody doing business in the United States. And yeah, the goal is to say, look, we want to know who you are. So that way, if you're doing something bad, we can track you and figure out what you're doing and what company you're dealing with. The reality is, of course, for all those listening, right, they're not really concerned with you, right? But they want to have that database, right? The other thing to know is if you've filed a registered entity, is that you filed with your state, create your LLC or your corporation, whatever it is. Your state knows who you are. Your state knows what the registered entity is, but the federal government didn't necessarily know that. And there's a question about constitutionality, which we can talk a little bit later. But generally speaking, the federal government's like, look, we don't have this information readily available, so we want this information. That's why they're doing it.
Got it. Dave, switching over to you, I know as a clinician, you're thinking about this. Like, how are you thinking about this for your private practice?
Well, when I first learned about this, the first way I think about it was a little bit of a panic because the enforcement is very, very scary. They have a whole list of ways that they say they can go after you, including jail time and fines, daily fines for being out of compliance. And then I found out what it took to comply, and then I was very relieved because it took about 10, 15 minutes to go on the website, input the data that I already had. It didn't take any research, click submit, and then I washed my hands of it. I'm done. This is not like some other rules where you have to re-up your compliance every year or anything. You just set it and forget it. I'll never have to do this again unless I make significant changes to my ownership structure or anything like that. So the way the rules are is that we have to be in compliance by the end of 2024. So we have to, what's that?
For you,
for me,
an entity like
yes.
yours. And
yes,
we can talk about this in a couple minutes about what other, but just to clarify people, a certain segment of the population does have the ability to do that.
That's right. Yeah, because my company was created in 2021. We're a 3-person partnership. And so we, because our company was created back then, we have until the end of this year to be in compliance, which again, I did it in 10, 15 minutes a couple months ago. I believe companies that are created this year and then companies moving forward have about 1 month to be in compliance, if I'm not mistaken. But for the rest of us, they give us to the end of this year, and then that's it. Like you can then be done with it.
I mean, it's nice to hear you talk that it brought relief. Do you remember offhand like what sort of information like that they wanted? Was it like your LLC name? Like,
Yeah, stuff like that. Our tax ID number, who owns it. So the rules are that if you they want the information for ownership, and if you own 25% or greater of a share in the company, then you have to register. And so they just wanted my personal information so that they could find me if there was ever an issue with if I were ever skimming money from foreign governments. Which, if you're a foreign government, reach out, let me know. I could use your money, but I say with my lawyer on the call. But honestly, it was they just wanted that basic information of who I am and where they could find me, and that's about it. It was really not complicated.
yeah, and you said the 25%. So because you had a three-person partnership, like
Yeah,
you could
we
get
have we
partners.
have 33%
Well,
ownership. So yeah,
yeah, and there's a number of people who it applies to 25% ownership is one of the categories. The other thing I would say, to kind of latch on what David was saying was, it is when you first look at the rules and you look at the compliance, you're like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Um, I think the 2 points that Dave highlighted that are important are that while there are, steep penalties, and we can talk about the consequences of not reporting it in a little bit. But I think that there's an asterisk on that, first of all. The second thing is for people to know is, guys, and everyone listening, this is not hard to do if you are required to do it. And you're going to hear me say this repeatedly, and Dave will tell you, and I say this all the time. If you're not sure what to do, then get help. Right? Go to your accountant. Go to your lawyer. It can get done really quickly for you. It's not as scary as you think it might be.
Yeah, no, thank you for like I think normalizing that and saying all of that. We started to talk about this, and Dan, maybe you can start this, and Dave, feel free to like chime in. What does this filing process look like for like solo and group practices? So it sounds like for us, with regard to this like Corporate Transparency Act, I wonder if we could just go a little deeper into it. Is
Sure.
it just the submission, or is it different, like depending on your LLC structure, all that kind of stuff?
Right. So when we talk about reporting companies, right, we're talking about LLCs for sure. We're talking about corporations. So you're an S-corp, you're an LLC. We are talking about you. The way I describe it is other entities that are otherwise required to file with the state, right, or the federal government, right. Generally, like if I'm filing to create my entity with the state that I'm in, like Maryland, for example, most likely the act will apply to me, and I will be required to apply. As Dave said, there's a process, there's a website. What I do like about what they've done with the FinCEN website is I think now I'm a lawyer. I try to put myself in the shoes of ordinary person, and doing that to me it seemed pretty self-explanatory. I think they do a pretty good job step by step walking through what they want. So it's really just okay, do this, upload this, give us this information, tell us this, click submit.
Got it.
Right. When it comes to you know people who don't have registered entities. So let's say I'm a therapist and I've never registered my company. Essentially, you're what we in the IRS would call a solo or a proprietorship, right? So you've never registered, you just are, you're just doing your thing. One way to know if that's you is, if you don't have a LLC or S-corp or anything like that, you don't, from a legal perspective, you don't have liability protection. Now that's a whole other issue we could look into. What it also means then is you haven't actually registered anywhere, and likely then you may not need to actually file, right? Because the government's saying, well, you're not actually a registered entity that we care about, right? You're just you, right? The IRS cares, but the IRS knows that you, John Doe, are filing with them and saying, I earn X amount of money, I have X amount of expenses, here's my taxes, right? There's nothing you're reporting on, like if I have an LLC where I'm filing the annual report every year. That's the government saying, okay, yeah, this applies to you. Does that make sense? Am I trying to explain this as clearly as possible?
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean,
My one caveat is, again, I'm going to say this over and over again. If you're sitting here listening to this right now, I'm not really sure. No problem. Right? Go on the website, see, read the information, see if that makes sense to you. If not, Hopefully you have an accountant or a lawyer, or know when you can contact, and they can absolutely help guide you here to make sure to figure out whether you even need to apply at all.
Yeah. Uh, Dave, is there anything that you would add with regard to that, like solo or group practices?
No, just they only care about ownership information. So if you have a group practice and you're the sole owner and you have 20 employees, they don't care about the 20 employees. They just want to know about you. So it only matters if it's multiple owners or single owner.
Got it. And then I'm thinking like you guys alluded to this earlier. So I know there's like this thing where a lot of times when clinicians first start in private practice, they don't have like an LLC or S-corp or anything. They kind of just start out. So it sounds like because they're technically not an entity, right? There may not be a responsibility disclosed, but it's probably just being cautious to go ahead and do that. Is that the way that I understood that?
I don't know. No, I think the first part's correct,
Yeah.
right? From what we can tell now, based on what's being documented in the law and what the procedures and policies are now, yes, you are a solo practice. You've never registered in, right? So let's say I decide tomorrow I want to start my own therapy practice business. Great, I'm Dan Mayer, therapist. I'm not licensed, so I'm not saying I am. Let's say I was, right? I'm now saying, look, I'm here, I'm me, I'm doing business as Dan Mayer therapy. Okay. As far as the state, my state, Maryland is concerned, and the IRS is concerned, okay, when I file my taxes, they're going to say, what did you earn this year? Any exemptions you're making? Great, here's what you owe us, right? And that's it. That's all. It's simple as that. It's when you file with this state that you're in and say, no, I now want to add, I want to become an actual registered business. Now there's an actual legal entity that I'm now acting under, that those reporting requirements kick in now. Right? Now that could be subject to change down the line, but as of now, that's our understanding, is that if you're just you doing therapy, you're not likely going to be needing to report as of now. Again, and I know I sound like a broken record, but I'm a lawyer, I have to do this. This is I compulsion I have. Is to say, if you're not sure, talk to someone, verify this before deciding not to do it. Okay. That's what I was saying.
This might be a really silly question, but like if they're only really going for like registered entities, isn't there like a loophole of like couldn't businesses technically like still like do illegal behavior where they just don't register and they somehow do stuff under the like, I mean, isn't that a possibility? I don't know.
You're talking about therapy practices?
I mean, generally, like not just therapy practices, right? Like
So if you're a business and you don't register,
yeah,
so I personally,
Yeah.
I believe the federal government has unlimited amount of resources
uh-huh.
and the ability to find you if they want to find you.
Got
And
it.
the IRS, and goes into some of the constitutionality questions that I talked about. The IRS knows exactly who you are. They have your social security number. They know who you are. Presuming you're filing your taxes, they know who you are. And if you're reporting and saying, well, I made X amount of money during my business, if someone really wanted to, in my opinion, if someone wants to figure it out, the IRS wants to figure out whether you have a business that you can report, they're going to be able to do it, right? Or they could even contact the state, say, we're doing an audit, we're investigating, can you please tell me what business this person has? Oh, they do have an LLC. Oh, you didn't register. Okay, well, we got you, right? They have the ability and the resources to put towards that to figure out what's going on with you if they want. I think there's a broader question, which I've gotten from people as well. If that's the case, why do I need to report at all, right? But I think it's because, again, all that's extra steps that they have to jump through to get to figure out who you are and what you're doing. This is kind of designed, in my opinion, this is my own personal opinion, this is not a established legal opinion, is that they're creating a shortcut and saying, no, we're creating a database where we have this information, we can access it, we absolutely.
It's like they're streamlining the process. They can still do it the old-fashioned way, but this just makes it much simpler.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
So my advice: don't do that.
Yeah, right. It's just not.
I would say everyone listening to this podcast is probably, I'm going to go on a limb here and say everyone wants to do the right thing and is trying to, run things the right way. So don't go down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. We started talking about this, like alluding to it. So there is some controversy around this Corporate Transparency Act, whether it's constitutional or not constitutional. I was wondering if you guys could speak to that part of it.
How high a soapbox do you want me to get on here, Melvin? I mean, if I can
Uh,
get on it and start preaching, or
Low, medium soapbox.
no, I'm kidding. Okay. My personal opinion is this. Dave probably gonna roll his eyes, but I look at this and say, I've had this discussion with lawyers, and I've heard the arguments made by like the Chamber of Commerce and stuff. I don't buy personally into the argument that the federal government can't do this or shouldn't be doing this. The federal government regulates our taxes, they regulate our waterways. They have the power, we agree by the fact that we're a united country, to regulate and enforce laws and regulations, right? Everything from pay taxes to you don't hunt without a license to, here's how what you can do in national fisheries and not fisheries. We generally accept that they have the power to regulate things like that. In my opinion, then, personally, from a legal perspective, they do have the power. Congress approved and passed this act to say this is what we want to happen. That the president signed it. It's law. The question of constitutionality for my question is really more an esoteric one in that what I would say is the flip side. It hasn't yet been proven not to be constitutional, right? So until a court decides that it is unconstitutional, as of now, it is constitutional by the very fact that it hasn't been overturned. So in the way I look at it is the law is the law, and the government's saying this is what we want. And so until a court comes along and says it's not, I just don't buy into the argument. Someone's thinking, oh, we can't do this. Well, they are doing it.
Yeah, I suppose it's at some point a court could decide that it is unconstitutional because the way the courts work these days in the United States, anything can happen. It's Calvin ball out there when you can pick your judge and pick the Supreme Court and all that. It's a possibility that could happen, but until that point, it's moot for us. Somebody has to challenge it, and then the court has to choose that.
I'm not a constitutional scholar, right? There are those who are far more intelligent and educated on me on this particular point of the Constitution than I am. But what I would just also say is though that from my understanding and knowledge as an attorney, I look at this law and I personally can't see anything that seems to me to stand out as saying Congress overstepped here. Congress made a decision. We want the Treasury to have these powers. When you create this database, if I'm doing my own analysis here, we have other databases like the sex offender registry. We have all sorts of different ways of categorizing, collecting information already. This is just one more. Now, there may be constitutional scholars out there who may hear this and say, I absolutely disagree with you, and that's fine. But from my perspective, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's great. The last question I have for you, and this is for you, Dave. Beyond just submitting the stuff that you needed to and that you alluded to, is there any other kind of things that is there any like ripple effects or anything that you're thinking about like for your private practice?
None whatsoever. It's such a simple, here's the information, submit it. I never have to think about this again. So I'm not concerned about any ripple effects unless one of my partners or me decides to start doing very illegal behavior. Then this makes it easier for the feds to come after us. And honestly, good. They should come after us if we're doing that kind of illegal behavior. I don't want that kind of thing happening here. And by illegal behavior, I mean specifically the things that this act is trying to protect the people against, money laundering primarily. So it makes it maybe a little bit harder to do very illegal things. And I am okay with that. I do not foresee that being a problem. So no, I don't see any ripple effects, anything like that. When we were all trying to figure out the No Surprises Act and good faith estimates, the answer would have been yes, absolutely. It's a lot more paperwork and a lot more things to track because that's a recurring thing, needing to make sure I'm in compliance with that. It's an ongoing process. But this one, set it and forget it. So I'm good.
Yeah, I'm glad Dave mentioned it. That's what I was going to latch on to. I would say the same thing. Is I actually think the No Surprises Act created much more paperwork and burdensome tasks for practices on a community recurring basis. This, as Dave said, is literally you said it, you get it done. Now, if I may, there's two things I want to just tackle, which we kind of touched on, but I think it's important because those listening may have these questions, because I get these questions. And we touched on them briefly, so I want to expand on it quickly for those listening. When we talk about, yeah, you set it, file this and forget about it, that's fine, but there's an asterisk on there, okay? And I want to give everyone listening just some information. You can find this online too, obviously. But what are the rules here? If, as David alluded to, if you are a company, you're create like an LLC or a company, anytime from January 2024 and December 30th, 2024, you have 90 days to file. So if you created your LLC in February and you still haven't filed this, you're overdue. Get it in as quickly as you can. If you've created your before 2024, then yes, you do have until the end of the year. Okay. Starting next year, if you create an LLC, that's going, or entity, that is going to drop down to 30 days. Okay. Another thing that Dave alluded to is that if you do create your company, you file this, but then you make changes to it, substantial changes to ownership, things like that, very likely there's going to have to be a follow-up piece where you're going to have to update or amend the filing you have. Again, that's not overly burdensome. It's go in, update it, submit, you're done.
Now, we should say what is burdensome are the consequences if you do not do this.
And that's what I want to talk on next, because I also get that question. Okay.
Yeah.
What I would simply say is, if you look at it from just like, here's what the consequences are, it's terrifying. And I said earlier, there's an asterisk on this, and I want to mention that asterisk now. Okay, so everyone just so everyone knows, the consequences are you can have civil penalties up to $500 a day for non-compliance. There can be criminal penalties, including up to 2 years in jail and a fine of $10,000. That's scary. But the reality is, for all those listening, I believe, and most Americans who own businesses, you're not willfully not trying to file this, not trying to do the right thing. Melvin, you asked about that earlier. If I'm a company trying not to do this intentionally, they essentially said, we will, that's called willful, we are going to come find you, we are going to eventually come after you. The question is what happens if it's not willful? How does that work? And that's still kind of up in the air. It's not really sure, really clear to find what they're defining as willful or intentional or unintentional. So again, my advice here is, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I haven't done that, my advice to you is either go onto the website. You can literally type in FinCEN beneficial reporting, and it'll start bringing up all the websites you need. Go on there, walk yourself through it, see if you can understand it, and if it applies to you. If you're not sure still, talk to your financial person, your accountant, your lawyer, and get this just figured out. As Dave said, it's really quick. Once you kind of figure out whether you need to do it or not, you file it and you're done. You don't have to think twice about it.
Yeah, it's the likelihood that the federal government is going to come after you for being negligent and fine you $500 a day seems low and cumbersome, but they do have the enumerated powers to do so. So best to just knock it out. And once you're done with listening to this episode, take care of it. And then you don't ever have to worry about any of that.
Yeah.
There's something that a Medicaid attorney once told me, and I often think about this, and I often think about it in the larger context of practice for practitioners in general. We were talking about Medicaid and, what happens if a practitioner does something that violates Medicaid. And I remember her saying, look, at the end of the day, Medicaid, for example, is not trying to hunt you down and screw you over, right? If we go after someone, it's because there's a bad actor, there's a reason. We're really trying to feel like they've done something egregious from a public policy perspective or a financial perspective. They need to be dealt with, right? But the average person, if you make a mistake, we're not necessarily going to bring the hammer down. And I would argue that with how many businesses there are in the United States and the resources the federal government has, the average business owner, if you don't get into compliance likely you're gonna my analysis would be you likely probably will be able to get into compliance without too much happening. What they're really using this for is to scare people. Feel like this is serious. We're being dead serious about this. Do it, right? Kind of persuade, kind of persuade people to do it, and then also having the teeth available if they need to use it, right?
Yeah.
That's my analysis. They're not looking to screw over the mom and pop businesses in this country. They're not trying to make it unusually burdensome, and I think that's part of the reason why they said, yeah, file it, you're done, right? We don't want to make this be extra hard for you, but it's really important. So that's what we want to do.
Yeah. Dan, Dave, thank you both for your time on such an important topic. I mean, I am literally going to go take care of this.
Oh,
Right
good.
after
We've done our job.
Yeah. Um, where can we learn more? Well, tell us a little bit about the podcast, where we can find it, and then how we can touch base with you if we have questions.
Sure.
Any of that.
Well, we are at protectingyourpractice.com, and just type in protecting your practice to whatever podcast platform you have, and you'll find us there. Also, Dan is at Mayor Law, and I'm at Maryland OCD and Anxiety Therapy. That's my practice. And you can come find us there. Go on Protecting Your Practice, leave us some feedback, shoot us a message, let us know you heard us. It's always nice to hear those things. And we'd love to hear from you all. And
Yeah,
give our podcast a listen.
And I would say to latch on what Dave said. We are working on becoming better about rolling out episodes. And I think Dave and I have a bunch of different ideas and topics we want to cover, and that's forthcoming. So definitely feel free to check us out. If you have a topic or something or interest that's like, you really feel strongly about, send it to us. Maybe we'll look at it and do an episode on it. So,
Yeah.
but thank you so much, Melvin, for having us on.
No,
I really
thank you
appreciate it.
No, you're so welcome, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Same
Thanks,
to you.
guys.
Bye, y'all. Hey there. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dave and Dan, and especially if this is your first time hearing about the Corporate Transparency Act, and if you're a therapist in private practice here in the US, I hope that today's session is helpful for you. Big action step on this, go to fincen.gov. So that's FINCEN.gov. And I'm looking at the website right now. There's literally a section that says, how do I file? And you can literally get this done in 10 minutes. I don't mess with this kind of stuff. So I'm going to be doing this as soon as I finish recording. And I don't know. I mean, this is, on one hand, like, yes, there's like questions around constitutionality and all of these things, but at least for me, what I'm trying to think about is like, okay, this seems like something that can really help reduce things like shell corporations doing illicit stuff and money laundering and all of that kind of stuff. So definitely, again, go over to fincen.gov and take care of this before the end of 2024. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you for the next session, which will be the final session for 2024.